Hi everyone. So I've been reading stories that my great Aunt May wrote a long while ago that I have, and some of the stories I realized that maybe some people don't understand, or even I had to look up some of the words because I wasn't sure I understood because of how long it was when she wrote it back when she was younger. Okay, so what I was going to do was try to explain one of them, and after I did some research, because I didn't know what tallow meant either. So the story is tallow candles and Aladdin lamps. Do you remember when your grandmother and mother made tallow candles for their lights? Their wicks were dipped in the tallow and allowed to cool, and each wick was re-dipped until the desired thickness was reached. The tallow had to be kept at just the right heat because if it was too hot, it would melt what had already stuck to the wick. So tallow is the white, nearly tasteless, solid, rendered fat of cattle and sheep used chiefly in soap, candles, and lubricants. So it's animal fat. So the wick, this is a wick. This goes in the bottom of a candle, and this goes through the wax of the candle that we know today, and it gets lit when you light the candle. So what she was talking about was they would take the fat and wicks like this. Actually, it was 2 strings is what they ended up doing, but it was wicks like this. And they would dip it into the fat until they got the desired thickness to make a candle. Now, they weren't candles like we know today where they smell good, like these. So these smell good. These were used for a purpose. They had no electricity, so their only light at night was a candle. They didn't smell very good. And the reason they would put them in here is because they would melt and turn into an oil. And they were only about a half hour good to use before it became a fire hazard. So then, in later days, someone came up with a candle mold which resembled the iron corn stick baking forms. It was 2 pieces with a hole in the top for the wick. The tallow was poured in the mold and allowed to harden. Later, these molds were used in making wax candles. So what she was talking about is mold like this. So they would take 2 halves and put them together. And there was a hole in the top of that, and they would pour the fat down inside and let it harden to make a candle. The most wonderful thing happened when one day grandfather came home with a new invention, the kerosene lamp. It gave more light and there was no messy wax. But since everything has its drawbacks, the smoky black chimneys of the lamps had to be cleaned and the wicks trimmed. Each had to be filled with kerosene before the next evening. So kerosene lamps, hurricane lamps, and kerosene is a fuel. Probably you can get it in the store still. And they would fill the bottom here, and there was a wick in the middle, and this little knob right there, you could turn it and make the wick go up or down, taller or shorter, and you could light it. And this is what they did for a long time too, because they still had no electricity in the house. 20 to 30 years later, when my father brought home an Aladdin lamp with mantles, we had to shield our eyes against the bright light when hung up on the ceiling. It would light the entire downstairs. However, the mantles were very fragile and had to be handled with the utmost care. One little jar hitting it while filling it, while using the little hand pump, and no more mantle. So when she said Aladdin lamps, I'm thinking one of these. Like, you know, Rebajidi, Aladdin. But what it really is one of these. And they would hang it from the ceiling. And you would fill the bottom part here. And this ended up, if it had a wick, it could go up and down. But what she was talking about with mantles was these pieces. If you've ever been camping, the kerosene lanterns that you can take camping still have the mantles. And when they get burnt, and they become very fragile. And if you would, and she said when you bump into them or jar the whole thing, it would become fragile and brittle and fall apart, and you'd have to replace them. Finally, we got electricity. One bulb on a long wire. What a wonderful thing. We took all these things for granted now and seldom think back to the old kerosene lamps. When we talk about the good old days, do we really want to go back to all those inconveniences? What she was also talking about earlier is when she ended up saying that the kerosene lamps ended up getting smoky. A lot of times the smoke would fill this and make it all black. It didn't stay clear and clean all the time. They had to be cleaned often. And then electricity, they ended up with a light bulb with a filament. And nowadays, those are starting to go out. And light bulbs now have LED parts inside them, which don't make them as hot, and they last longer. But with all that, like I said, some of the stories, I understand some of it because I grew up hearing a lot of these stories, but because I didn't know all the words and I had to look it up myself, I thought maybe I'd end up sharing the information that I found with you. Love you. Talk to you later. Bye.